All right, we will get started, and we know that more people will come in as we go forward, which will be great. My name is Laura Keeler. I'm one of the law practice advisors at Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, Mass LOMAP. I am delighted to be hosting webinars for busy lawyers for you today. If you don't know about LCL, I encourage you to check out our website, lclma.org. We do a lot of free confidential services for legal professionals in Massachusetts, including this session on webinars for busy lawyers. We recognize that lawyers are incredibly busy people, and so we have these sessions that are half an hour or less in presentation, followed by Q&A, and they will give you practical takeaways on topics that are of interest to you. Today's topic, burnout, is of strong interest to many of you. We know that this is timely during the pandemic. So before I introduce our speaker, I want to note that this session is being recorded and slides will be available after the presentation. If you've registered with us, you will receive an email, so you don't have to worry about copying everything hand by hand. You can watch the recording afterwards. We also have our past webinars on demand, including last month's, which we had on time management. If you have questions beyond the scope of this program, we also have free consultations with LCL, both on the clinical side and on the practice management side. So for today, we're going to be talking about preventing and recovering burnout from the legal profession. And I am so happy to introduce my colleague, Dr. Shawn Healy. Dr. Shawn is a clinician with Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. He is one of the smartest, nicest people I know. In addition to that, he has written books including about for depression for lawyers. He has many specialties, which he will tell you more about. His last presentation for us, he did the secret sauce of sleep, which was a huge hit. If you have questions for following the presentation, we will take questions at the end, so please put them into the chat and we will do those afterwards. Dr. Shawn, we're so glad that you are here today to talk to us about burnout, and take it away. Thank you for being with us, and thank you all too in the audience. We're glad to have you today.
Thanks, Laura. And thank you all for joining us today. As Laura said, I'm Dr. Shawn Healy, clinical psychologist with Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers. So I'm here to talk to you about burnout. Burnout is one of those experiences that can have a significant impact on your personal well-being as well as your professional well-being. And burnout is in sort of the news, so to speak, more recently for a variety of reasons. One of which, from my perspective, has to do a lot with the ways in which we're adjusting to the pandemic. I think that many people are experiencing burnout for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is that many of us have been sort of holding our breath, so to speak, so like waiting for something to happen, hoping that we'll feel more in control of our lives again. And when that happens, when we're sort of holding our breath, waiting for something to happen, and that doesn't happen, we can often be reminded of how little control we have over things in our lives that are important to us. So the big takeaway from this presentation is really to focus on what you have control over and how to exercise that control in a healthy way. So let's see if I can advance my slides. There we go. But just to start out, as a reminder to many of you, burnout is a state of chronic stress. It is often tied to either your profession or a professional pursuit or a caregiving role. So oftentimes it is related to the work that we do. And this involves exhaustion, both physically and emotionally. Oftentimes it is accompanied by cynicism and detachment. So that's a removal from the values in which we were once motivated by. And also feeling ineffective, feeling powerless, feeling a lack of accomplishment. And over time, this results in burnout. So we can experience all of these things intermittently, time to time, situation to situation. But burnout really is like a slow burn, to sort of overuse an analogy maybe. There's lots of things that contribute to burnout. So I think at the heart of it It's often a lack of control or a lack of autonomy when you feel like what I'm doing, I don't really have control over. I'm doing it because of a demand put upon me or an obligation. Also, sort of overcommitting to things or feeling like I can't say no, I'm going to say yes, to the point where the thing that's going to stop me from saying yes is exhaustion or a limit or someone else saying no for me. Also, a lack of community when we feel like we're doing this by ourselves, when we are feeling a lack of social support or validation for what we're doing. We often feel like we're carrying this burden alone, and that always increases the weight of the burden. Another important thing is the alignment of our values with the work that we're doing. So personally, just take a little moment to assess the work that you do, whether it's as a solo practitioner, as an associate, working in an organization, nonprofit, government. Think about what the work that you're doing, what values sort of underpin the work that you're doing, and how are those values aligned with your personal values and professional values. And also, in addition to the work, if you work with others or in a system, what are the values that are communicated through others or through that system? And are they aligned with your values? When we feel like we're putting in a lot of time and effort into something that doesn't match up with our values, we can often feel this drain. And one way of thinking about burnout is sort of the removal of fuel, right? When something gets burned up, like the fuel gets spent and there's nothing left. So as we think of ourselves professionally, if we're feeling like we're being drained as time goes on and we're not being filled up in response to feeling drained, we're spending a lot of energy at work and we're not getting something back to fill us up, that's important to pay attention to because that's going to lead to burnout. And that filling up oftentimes is and a validation of our values. Like what I'm doing is important to me, and therefore I get something out of it, and not just I'm spending my energy. Other things to sort of highlight are excessive workload. It feels like you have no control over that workload and it's excessive. There's not enough time in the day to do all the work, and the expectation is that you're going to do all the work. Also, a lack of recognition. There's been lots of surveys over the years, it's not new information, but the things that are most important to employees, the number one is not pay. Like your salary or the money you make isn't the top in terms of surveys of employees. Usually that it's the pay is usually in the top 10, top 5, but usually at the top of that list is recognition, validation, and appreciation. Like, am I appreciated and recognized for the work that I do? I'm putting out a lot. Is that appreciated? So when there's a lack of validation, appreciation, then again, that sort of drains us, that takes from us. And then finally, perfectionism. Feeling like I have to do it perfectly, like my task is to do something without error, and therefore the work isn't done until it's perfect. That's a drain as well. So I mentioned that burnout is a big issue in the headlines these days. One such example of this is the Institute for Wellbeing in Law did a survey in May of last year, where they surveyed just over 1,000 participants. 63% of the lawyers that they surveyed qualified for burnout in one of the measures that they used. And then their support staff that participated, over 50% qualified for burnout. So this isn't just a thing that we should be accepting. Oh yeah, it's a stressful profession. That's what we signed up for. Burnout is different than stress. This isn't just it's a stressful profession. This is people are pouring into their work, not getting enough back, and therefore they're being drained. And that's going to affect, again, them personally and professionally. So how do you know if you're experiencing burnout or if it's sort of coming on? I'm going to assume, at least for this slide, that none of you have burnout. You have no idea what it is. So things like every day is a bad day, right? When it feels like it doesn't matter what my day is going to bring or what I have on my schedule, like they all feel the same. It just feels like a bad day. When caring about tasks seems pointless. When I used to look forward to something, I used to be invested in a particular task, and now it just seems pointless to care. It's like, yep, they're all the same. When it's more difficult to complete a task that wasn't as difficult before. Suddenly a simple task that didn't seem like it was a big ask in terms of the energy output, now it seems like it's a big ask. It requires more for me to do the same task. Also, trouble focusing, feeling more distracted, inability to concentrate, pessimism about your abilities. So my hope for my ability to impact the larger world or accomplish a goal, like my optimism fades away. Also, just a lack of interest and excitement in the work that I'm doing. I'm no longer interested in something that I used to be interested in. And on a physical level, feeling physically unwell, feeling exhausted, maybe having more health issues, sort of persistent feelings of just not quite 100%. You might not feel like you're totally sick. You might just feel persistently under the weather, or to the extreme, more exhausted. And again, for this slide, I'm going to assume that most of you are at the earlier end of burnout. So, or maybe you haven't experienced it yet. So how do you prevent it from ever happening? One is to set clear boundaries early on. This is an example of exercising control in your life in a healthy way. A boundary is when you say no, when you could say yes. So this is you deciding what you do with your time, what you do with your energy, and what priorities you focus on. When you don't have boundaries, then you rely on something or someone else to say no for you. And literally, you give that control over to some other entity, hoping that they're going to take care of you, and they won't. So we need to take care of ourselves. So setting clear boundaries is very important, and maintaining those boundaries. So setting a firm, clear boundary is a way of protecting yourself and also communicating care for somebody on the other side of that boundary. Saying no to reasonable requests. This is often counterintuitive. We often feel like I can say no to an unreasonable request. But really, being able to say no to a reasonable request goes to that idea of boundaries. I can decide when I say yes and when I say no. It doesn't depend on the request that I'm getting and whether it's unreasonable or reasonable. I'm the one who decides. Other things like avoiding multitasking. Whenever we feel like we should be doing more than one thing, we should be trying to get everything done in an unrealistic amount of time, we're often very inefficient. So multitasking is inefficient. So when we can avoid multitasking, what we do is we focus on one thing. We're more efficient, but we also have to get rid of that idea that I'm supposed to be doing three things at once, because you never did three things at once. You just thought you did. Other things like respecting your downtime, having a clear delineation from work and non-work. This goes back to boundaries. This is a boundary with yourself sometimes, saying, I'm going to stop working now. I'm going to do something else with my time. I'm going to have downtime, leisure time, time with friends and family, and I'm not going to mix that with my work. What this looks like for you might look differently than somebody else, but the underlying idea is important, that you have time when you're not working, that you're deciding when you work, when you don't. Also, maintaining community is essential at preventing burnout. Whenever we are struggling with something, if we're struggling alone, the weight of that struggle increases. When we have community and social support, and we can talk to others about what we're struggling with, even if that thing doesn't practically change, sharing it with others lightens it. So the more that we are connected to others, the better we are, the better off we are, the healthier we are. And also identifying your values, having a clear sense of what my values are, what's important to me, that can help me identify, where I want to spend my time, what I want to say no to, what I want to prioritize. So for this slide, let's say that you're experiencing some burnout, right? It started, you've noticed those warning signs. What can you do to treat it once it started? Some suggestions here. One is to get more sleep, right? To literally focus on some basic stuff to help you feel better and more healthier. All right. So top of that list is always sleep. If you improve your sleep, unless you're getting great sleep now, improving your sleep is a great investment of your time and your energy, because the benefits of good sleep have ripple effects. Also, start saying no first, right? So if your default is to say yes and then figure out how you're going to do it, try the opposite. Start by saying no first, and then consider whether or not you want to make an exception afterwards. But as a rule, as a protective device, try to protect yourself with saying no more often than first. Other things like schedule time for your tasks. We often use our calendars for appointments, things that we need to reserve a specific block of time for. And the other tasks that we have, we're like, well, I'm just going to get that done throughout the day at some point. And email is one of those things where it can easily suck up multiple hours of our day without even intending to do so. So when you schedule time for email, you sort of contain that into a block of time that allows you to focus on that, as opposed to multitasking throughout your day, going back and forth between email and something else. So schedule time. Another is to do less and to focus more. Again, back to multitasking. When you do less, you do one thing at a time, you're actually able to be more efficient. You're able to focus more, be more present, and not be divided in terms of your attention. When we feel an increase of pressure, like I have more things to do than I have time in my day to do it, we often try to do things like multitasking, which actually makes us less efficient, which actually increases our stress. And then the cycle continues. And then we start sacrificing things like sleep in order to get more time to catch up. So in order to break that cycle, starting with your sleep, prioritize that. Try to do less, but focus more. You'll actually be more efficient. Because you're getting better sleep, you'll be able to do things more efficiently because you're thinking more clearly and you're more resourced. Other things are ask for help. This is one of the things that lawyers often hate to do in terms of their personal well-being, to actually admit that they could use some help. But asking for help, whether it's from your family members, your friends, your colleagues, your supervisors, your mentors, this is a really powerful thing to do. Because again, sharing a burden might not change the burden itself, but it'll change the weight of that burden. And also communicate to supervisors and managers that you're feeling burnt out, or you're starting to feel burnt out. If you're working in a system where there are people who have the power to make changes to that system, communicating what would be helpful, what you need, what is unhelpful, and doing that in a collaborative way can help you as well as others within that system. So let's say that you've not only started burnout, but you're fully burnt out. Like, how do you recover when you're feeling burnt out? Oftentimes it feels like once you're burnt out, it's hard to get out of it, because that requires energy. And when you're burnt out, you don't have that energy. You're drained. So start by stopping what it is that you're doing. If it feels like the pattern that I'm in, hopefully it will just miraculously change at some point. That's not a helpful way of assessing your situation. So whatever that pattern is, try thinking about stopping that pattern. So not just doing the day-to-day that you've been doing, hoping that something will change. Other things that are helpful in stopping that pattern is to take an intentional break, whether that is in your day, on the weekend, or actually planning time off. That can be helpful. It's one thing to feel like I have no more energy for the day, therefore I'm unable to work anymore. That's very different than saying, I'm planning a break. It's upcoming and I'm not going to work. Hopefully you'll have energy left over for that break to do something else. Again, when you're feeling burnt out, focusing on boundaries, sort of simplifying things can be really helpful. So saying no when you're burnt out, start with that no, have a clear boundary, and then allow yourself the ability to decide what you can do with your time and your energy. Look for other ways to prioritize self-care. I mentioned sleep. Other things like your diet and exercise, meditation, talking to friends, increasing your social support so you don't feel alone. Talking to other lawyers who are also feeling burnt out or have felt burnt out in the past, and now they're in a better place or a different place. Getting advice from others who have been down that path that you're currently on. Another thing is to reevaluate your priorities, or to realign your values. When you realize that your values don't match up with the system that you're in or the work that you're doing, it's a good time to remind yourself of what your values are and what else could be a better alignment of those values. And then increase community. Again, the more that you have that social support and validation, the easier the burden is. And when you're burnt out, it often feels like you can't see a way out. If you're in community and talking to others, they have a different perspective than you do. They can often identify options that you didn't see available, or a route that was hidden from you that might be clear to somebody else. Also, in terms of addressing the burnout that you're experiencing, sometimes it's helpful to do a practical exercise. And so one suggestion is to write down everything that you have to do right now. What are the demands on your plate? Then ask yourself how to categorize them into the 5 areas, or ask yourself these 5 questions. What should I stop doing? It's like, I don't need to do it. I can just stop it. I can throw it away. What can I work on later? It doesn't demand my attention right now. It can be done later. What can you automate? Like, what technology might be helpful to take a step or a task away from you? What can you delegate? Do you have support staff, or whether at work, or do you have tasks at home or your personal life that you can actually ask somebody else to help you with and to take over for you? And then what should you keep doing? What are your priorities? What is helpful, or what should you continue to dedicate your time and energy to? Then, in order to continue this progression, focus on yourself. Okay, eat more good stuff. Prioritize your sleep. Meditate, relax, focus on the present moment. Exercise for fun. We often talk about, good self-care includes exercise, and that can often feel like an added task or an added burden. Oftentimes, when we think about exercise as something that we have fun doing, that can lighten that load, that burden. So think about what would be fun to do that would involve exercise, as opposed to thinking about exercise that might be fun, and explore that more. And then pursue fun and passion. So think about hobbies that you used to have. Think about things that you used to be interested in, or things that you thought, one day I would like to do this. And actually make a plan to engage in that stuff. So brainstorm some activities that used to be fun for you, or that you want to do. Actually make a plan by picking one of those and committing to doing it on a weekly basis, even if it's for an hour a week or a half hour a week. And then involve community. So talk to somebody who you like, who makes you laugh, who brings you joy. Tell them about your plan. This is what I'm going to do. All right. So community can not only be a helpful element to lighten the burden of a task, can also be a helpful motivator to keep a plan moving forward. So when you make a plan to sort of infuse some fun and passion back into your life, that can be very helpful in fighting off burnout. Because again, burnout oftentimes is I'm spending a lot of energy on something that doesn't align with my values. If the work that I'm doing is hard and demanding, but is aligned with my values, I often feel rejuvenated by that hard work. I get something out of it. So when you're in a situation where you don't have that from your work, getting that from somewhere else in your life through a hobby, through an activity, can often sort of give you that little fill up, can give you that energy to then help you make changes in a different part of your life, in your work. But sometimes burnout isn't something to just eliminate and avoid. What if it's a sign? What if you're burnt out because the work that you're doing isn't actually connected with your interests or your passions at all, or your values? So there are times when it's helpful, because you've done that value assessment, to actually have an honest look at the work that you're doing and the organization that you're in or the system that you're in, and to evaluate, is this a good match for me? What would I like to do instead of this? If I wasn't doing this, if magically this job or this client or this area of law suddenly didn't exist, what else would I do? What would I be more interested in doing? If that isn't possible, if you can't, or if that's not helpful to imagine that, sometimes just taking a break. So again, scheduling some time off, taking some break or some distance from the work, and see if that distance sort of ignites that interest. Right, the absence makes the heart grow fonder way of thinking. Like if I have some distance from something, suddenly I'm like, oh, actually, I do like it. Or maybe that I can identify things that I do like about it and things that I don't like about it. Another helpful strategy might be to use the 80-20 rule. So this rule says that 80% of our stress comes from 20% of our work. So if we can identify what that 20% is, and then evaluate what options do I have to change that 20%, would I then like the work that I'm doing better? Is it worth it to stay here doing what I'm doing if that 20% can change? If not, if like, oh yeah, I take away the 20%, but what's left, that 80% isn't of interest to me, it doesn't really align with my values, my goals, then that's a good time to reassess. And then also, are you using your natural strengths? Right? Back to that idea of, is this a good match for me? I've talked to plenty of lawyers who have taken positions not because of interest in the work or alignment of values, but because it was offered, or it seemed like the only option, or I need to pay bills, I got loans, I need to be making some money. So they start in a job and then they don't reassess whether or not they should stay there. And over time, they experience burnout. So sometimes it's helpful to not only think about your values, but also what are your strengths? What are you good at? Is what you're doing a good match for what you're good at and what you're interested in? And also, it's helpful not only just to be thinking about yourself in terms of burnout, preventing it or recovering, but also helping other people. If you have support staff that you work with, if you are a manager or supervisor, if you are in a position to influence someone else's experience of burnout, it's helpful to exercise that control as well. Because when you can help somebody else, oftentimes that's aligned with your values of helping others. And even if the work itself might not provide that, helping others that you work with might be able to. So communicate your interest in the well-being of those who you work with or that that work for you. Demonstrate appreciation and validation for the work that people are doing. Even if it's as simple as saying, thank you for that. I appreciate the work that you put into that. Right? Provide support or opportunities for advancement and growth, positive feedback, even constructive feedback. But provide that two-way communication. And to the extent possible, give more autonomy and control to those who are working for you, so they feel like they're not just doing something that they're given, but they have some say in how they do it, when they do it, and what they're doing. And also have a conversation about the alignment of values. Is the work that you're asking somebody to do lined up with their values? Is the culture in which you're operating an alignment as well? And then finally, utilize social supports for yourself and for others. So ask other people, trusted friends, what they think about your situation, about what you're experiencing. Talk about questions and concerns. Don't go it alone. Right? Talk to others. Make it a community process. And access the mental health care, not just when you feel like you really need it, but as a baseline. Like accessing that care can be really helpful in preventing and recovering from burnout. And that is a very quick way of going through a bunch of slides on burnout. So now that we have Q&A time, feel free to either use the chat, or I don't think people can unmute, can they?
They cannot unmute on this. That was terrific, Shawn. As Shawn mentioned, use the chat. I know we have some questions in. We'll get to more of those in a moment. I also just want to launch a poll to see what sort of backgrounds people have, because Shawn talked about helping others that you work with or work for you. And be interesting to know for our audience today, what sort of backgrounds you're coming from, and then we can address some of that as well. Shawn, you brought up so many great points, and particularly about increasing and utilizing social supports. So many people think that they're in this alone or this is unique to them. And as you brought up, this is affecting nearly 2/3 of lawyers, over half of of support staff. So if you are feeling burnout anywhere along the spectrum, know that you are not alone. And we're so glad that you are here today to learn about this. As Shawn went over, contributors to burnout, signs of burnout, how to prevent it, soothing the burn, reevaluating and seeing how we can recover. So these are wonderful tips. I just want to share the results of the poll, and then we'll go to some questions. So we have 34% of our audience today is from solos or small firms. That's 1 to 10 attorneys in the firm. We have 24% are from medium or large firms. We have 34% are from government or nonprofit. 4% are corporate or in-house, 1% are law school faculty, 4% are law students. So we have a range of everybody, and we're so glad that all of you are here today and we can hear your perspectives. So one question, can we access Secret Sauce of Sleep? Yes, you can access that, and I can drop the link to the recording in the chat. As a solo, I find it hard to get a break, and that contributes greatly to burnout. How can I take a break without financial detriment?
That's a great question. This comes up a lot for solos who, basically they don't have that built-in sort of time off or ebbs and flows of their schedules where they can just take a vacation. So one suggestion that I've heard from others that I think is really helpful is to have an idea of how much you need to be billing in order to meet your financial obligations, to have the financial success that you want. And once you have that idea, then actually coming up with a schedule for your year where you're able to put in the time to build that amount, but also reserve time for a time off, for a vacation, so that it feels like you're planning ahead for it, as opposed to constantly trying to keep your head above water. If you know what you need to build, what you need to make, that will help you at least plan, give yourself that opportunity to take a break. But quite frankly, it's really hard, particularly for solo practitioners who are in court, who are trying to sort of respond to clients and court dates and that, to feel like they have control over their schedules. So anything that you can do, if the sort of planning a yearly vacation seems too far away from reality, start smaller. Start by having boundaries with when you're going to stop working for your day or for the weekend, so you feel like I have the ability to protect some time. I have some control over that. And then from there, once you feel like you can do that, you can always extend or try to plan further out. But that's a great question. I say it like it's easy. It's not easy to do. I say a lot of things like it's easy. None of it's easy.
Those are great points, Shawn. To add on to that, and we recognize it is so tough for solos. If you're having common pain points in the practice, remember that you can do free consultations with us as well. We can go over them. There may be some things that you're able to automate or delegate or do more efficiently for not as much money. Things like Text Expander can be great tools that are very affordable even for solos. Maybe too, you want to think about having a backup attorney where you switch back and forth if you're going to take long weekends. It certainly is hard, but there are some options to look at. Our next question, how can attorneys grapple with this culture of believing that setting boundaries, saying no, and having a work-life balance will be detrimental to an attorney's career? Curious about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I've talked to a number of attorneys who have that perspective. Like I can't say no. I can't have a work-life balance because then people won't give me, the work that I want, or clients won't recommend me, or the firm won't promote me. And oftentimes I contrast that with, partners at a firm who feel more confidence, and therefore like, no, I have work-life balance. I stop at this time. I don't work, this day of the week or what have you. Obviously, not everybody does that, but whenever I talk to someone who has that level of confidence, like, no, this is a priority for me. This is what I do, and like, it doesn't matter if you disagree with me. I have the confidence in this boundary, so it's important to me. People often view that individual as someone with greater confidence, so they know what they're doing. I would recommend that people start with themselves, as opposed to trying to start with changing the system first and then setting boundaries or prioritizing work-life balance for themselves. We have to start with ourselves, and then hopefully that will spread to others. So when other people see that it's possible, even if there's pushback, it's still possible, then others are more likely to do it as well. And I just think that in terms of your professional career, you're going to be more successful if you have boundaries, if you have better work-life balance. Without boundaries and without that balance, your efficiency, your competence goes down. So sometimes what prevents us from setting those boundaries is fear. Like, I'm afraid that something bad will happen. And sometimes it's just getting over that fear and setting that boundary and realizing that I survived it and I can keep going allows us to then create more boundaries or better boundaries. So again, I highly encourage people to start small with boundaries, but start with yourself and then encourage others to do the same.
Those are great points about starting small. We had a note come in that thanked so much for the presentation, noting that even taking the half hour to listen in and not catch up on emails today was very relaxing. Appreciate it. And that goes back to what you were talking about, scheduling time for emails and batching. This is something we learned too in time management tips from last month. If you can try to batch emails and phone calls back to the client, if you can try to avoid multitasking, you'll be able to have more focus and more productivity on each thing. So that's great that you were able to not catch up on emails as constantly today. I would even encourage lawyers to turn off notifications for their emails unless it is something that is really urgent, coming in. So we have, what are your thoughts on setting boundaries regarding telephone and email correspondence with clients? Oh, and that comes right in. So my first thought, and then I'll turn it to Dr. Shawn, is to let your clients know that what your office hours are. And this can be something you do within the engagement letter when you sign them on as a client. What they may think is an emergency is probably not going to be an emergency for you. And or if they're emailing you with something at 8 p.m. on a Friday, there's very likely there is little that you can do until offices resume, including the courts on Monday. So I would talk with them up front about your ability to, respond back to them in 24 hours or whatever the notice may be, and try to batch your email responses. Dr. Shawn, what would you like to add on setting boundaries on telephone and email?
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions. And to Laura's point, setting a boundary sooner at the beginning rather than later is much more efficient, much more comfortable. So if a client knows that this is my boundary, these are my hours in my, engagement letter or in my email signature line, it spells out like this is the time that I'm available, or in your voicemail, like a repeated reminder of your boundaries is helpful. And then maintaining that boundary. So not making exceptions unless there's an emergency. There's always exceptions that come up, but making it truly an exception versus the rule. So whenever you can maintain that boundary well, people will adjust. They're either going to adjust by respecting that boundary, or they're going to adjust by not expecting you to respond. They might still flood you with emails and calls, but sooner or later, people will start to adjust. And the more that you can maintain a boundary, that communicates confidence, right? If a client is constantly wanting you to break boundaries and you break your boundaries, that doesn't actually communicate confidence in you. But if you can be clear and consistent, that will communicate confidence that you know what you're doing, what you say is what you do, and you can be relied on. So I know it's easy for me to say it. It's hard to actually do it, but starting early and being clear is the thing I would suggest.
Those are great pointers, being clear and consistent and upfront early. We have some people that wrote in thanking you so much for the presentation, noting that they have to go for other meetings. We're so glad that we have you here. This person asks, are there any resources, therapy, or groups to assist solo practitioners? Shawn, I'll have you kick this off.
Yeah, so at LCL, my colleague, Dr. Fortgang, runs Solo Stress, which is a stress group for solo practitioners. He also runs one for immigration attorneys. They're online. It's a great resource for solos and immigration attorneys to connect with each other and to support each other in the work that they're doing.
Excellent. Yes. So Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers has a lot of resources. I would also suggest for solo practitioners, I know a lot of clients I work with find support in community, whether it's the Mass Bar Association, whether it's county bars, groups where you can connect with other lawyers, where you can commiserate about some things that are going on, can also be a help. For example, I'm part of the Massachusetts Bar Association solo small firm law practice management section, and it's a great group. You can put things in my bar portal. We have water coolers if people have questions, can ask panelists. There's different activities that go on for topics. So I would encourage you to reach out. If you want more questions afterwards, feel free to email me. All right, this person notes these issues are prominent for solo practitioners and we make up about half the lawyers in the state. Thanks. Thank you for that note. And yes, as we saw too from the poll, we have a lot of people today who are solo and small firm practitioners. This person notes, I work at a small nonprofit. What form can appreciation take that is not a pat on the head or some routine email sent to everyone praising the work we do? Great question.
That's a great question. Yeah, I think part of validation is sincerity. So if the acknowledgement isn't sincere, then it's not going to have the impact. So sincere acknowledgement or appreciation can be communicated in a way that doesn't just feel like a pat on the back, like, yeah, good job. But obviously for small nonprofits, it's often not an option to reward somebody or acknowledge them with a pay raise or a bonus. So other things could be, in addition to privately and publicly acknowledging the hard work that they're doing and validate that, sometimes promoting to a different position. So even though it might sound like not the same impact as a raise, but a title change can be an acknowledgement of appreciation and trust and more responsibility. Also, giving more autonomy to the person to decide what they're doing with their time at work, what work they're taking on. So giving more control or responsibility in a way that aligns with their interests can be a way of acknowledging their value to the organization, and also promoting their interests as well. Um, yeah, I'm sure there are other creative ways. I'm not the most creative person to come up with creative ways to acknowledge people, but those are the ones that pop in my
Those are great ideas. I think a title change, increasing someone's autonomy, part of that you could increase their flexibility of their schedule. And as far as to your note about not having it be a pat in the head, if you can find something sincere and specific about the work that was done, I think the praise often means a lot more.
head. Absolutely.
Let's see, we have people who said, can you speak to long-term sustainability for nonprofit attorneys?
Mm.
There are always more people in need of help on critical issues, such as immigration and housing, than there are free attorneys. Saying no takes an emotional toll too, and sometimes adds to the burnout. How do we balance it all? That is a tough question.
Yeah. So file this into the category of easier said than done, but um, I think this happens all the time with nonprofits, with legal aid, where the need is so much bigger than your ability to meet it. And so by definition, you cannot meet all the needs. So one is just to start with that acknowledgement, accepting that you cannot help everybody. You cannot meet all the needs. Right? And that in and of itself feels bad. And then from there, acknowledging that, so it's a given that I can't meet everybody's needs. Do I want to work to the point where I feel completely drained trying to? Or is it healthier for me, professionally and personally, to have a stopping point before I'm totally drained? And that requires practice. That requires practice with those boundaries. That requires practice acknowledging that it feels bad, but also waiting out that feeling like it's not going to last forever. And focusing, instead of focusing on what you can't do, I can't meet all these needs, focusing on what I can do. So I can protect myself, I can make sure that I'm well, and that I'm competent to help others. And here's how I can help others. This is what I can focus on. By definition, I have to say no because I can't meet all the needs. So that no is either going to be said by me or my limitation. And it's much healthier to say no yourself. It just takes practice. And talking to other people about that is really helpful because then it feels like I'm not the only one struggling with this. My colleagues struggle with this. Other people in other nonprofits struggle with this. This is really hard to do. And in order to be the best advocate that I can be for the people I'm trying to help, by definition, I need to take care of myself too. So having that social support, practicing those boundaries is not going to change the fact that you can't help everyone and that resources are limited. That will make it more manageable in that position when you are taking care of yourself first.
Shawn, those are excellent tips. And that part of that managing goes back to what you were saying about trying to focus on what you can control, because that will help prevent burnout as well if you try to focus on that. There's so many factors outside of all control. If you can try to focus on what you can, it is a very hard situation. You gave some excellent feedback on that. All right, this person wrote in, this presentation gave great food for thought. Thank you so much for your feedback. This person says, thanks, I have to go to a planned event. Best. This person says, can we get the slides? Yes, you will be able to get the slides in the recording afterwards. This person notes this information is so helpful. Many thanks. Thank you all for this great feedback and being here. Our colleague Rachel posted a link to the solo stress support group. Thanks so much, Rachel. This person notes, one of the issues with working in a system of a law practice with other lawyers is being able to set boundaries for yourself within the system. Great thoughts. All right, and we have the link for Dr. Shawn's past webinar on improving sleep, the secret sauce of career success. We have some more people saying thank you. Provided link for time management session. Yes, I will drop that in the chat in a moment. This person put, thanks you so much, I have to go. That's fine, thank you. And let's see, are we caught up with other ones. All right, I think we are about caught up with questions, so I will drop that in the link. And Dr. Shawn, while we're waiting to see if people have other final questions here, would you talk some about the difference when you're trying to set intentional time for yourself? It may be the difference between true self-care versus just putting on the TV, and is something more meaningful. And you talked about things that are fun. You can talk about meditation, exercise for fun. Would you talk about some of the things that are more helpful than others, recognizing that everyone has individual interests, of course?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So when you think about downtime or time for yourself, it's helpful to think about what you either are naturally drawn to or tempted to go to. So, and what those activities provide for you. So, some activities are good distraction, and we need distractions. There's nothing wrong in and of itself with a distraction. But if that distraction is just avoidance of, the stress that I'm feeling at work, I just want to not think about it for a while, but I don't actually get anything from that activity other than distraction. So things like, just watching Netflix for hours and hours. I'm not paid by them, so that's the only service I have. Anyway, um, so escapism in that way. It's just a temporary break, but I don't feel refueled by it. That would be a good point to reevaluate what you can do with your time. So what sort of activities would feel like this is of interest to me? This is a break from my work, and I'm getting something out of it. I'm being refueled, right, in some way. So, and also something that engages me. So, with stress from work, oftentimes our work doesn't end. So there's not like, the lights don't go off and all of a sudden, I punch out and that's it. We take it with us mentally, emotionally. So we're often carrying our work, particularly if you're working at home, you're working and relaxing in the same space, it can be difficult. So giving yourself something to engage in that's not work can be helpful. So whether that's a particular interest, a hobby, an activity that requires your attention and focus can be really helpful. And again, something that's going to give you something, whether that's knowledge, whether that's an activity that you find rejuvenating, whether it's an activity that promotes your health, something that at the end of it you feel better, not just my distraction is over and now I feel the same. And then somebody had mentioned, at least one person, about like boundaries with yourself. So making sure that you have boundaries with yourself that help you prioritize things like your sleep. So making sure that you tell yourself no, like I'm not working right now. I'm going to be doing something else, but I'm going to tell myself I'm only going to do that to a certain time so that I can get sleep. That I can prioritize that. I'm going to tell myself no, not 10 more episodes of the show, just one. And then I'm going to get sleep, and that's going to rejuvenate me. That's going to provide me with something. And again, particularly if your work doesn't naturally or internally promote your values, and you feel like an alignment there, making sure that your activities outside of work are in line with your values. So if you have a huge passion for, helping others directly, but your work is on, legal research and you don't feel that same connection, make sure that you're planning time outside of work to help others to have that connection, to feel like your values are being rejuvenated or stimulated.
Those are great points about rejuvenation, about energy, about refilling the well before it gets dry. I want to check in. We had someone that had raised their hand, but as I was going through all the questions in the chat, I didn't get a chance to call on them. If that person is still here and would still like to ask the question, just raise your hand again and be happy to call on you. So before we go on, I want to note that our next webinar for busy lawyers will be on March 30th with Sensei about vetting technology. So we're very excited to have them. Dr. Shawn, we have So excited to have you here today. This has been, as a lot of people in the chat have written, a great presentation. We really appreciate your expertise sharing with us, and you're reminding us of the importance of what we can do to prevent burnout, or if we're on the path to burnout, to soothe it. I want to thank our audience. You've been terrific today. You've had great questions and feedback. We so appreciate your time. We're almost out of time. If you have another question, let us know and we can try to probably take one more. But otherwise, I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Shawn for some parting thoughts on this.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, again, thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. And I think being intentional about how you spend your time is essential with how to prevent and recover from burnout. And if you're one of those people who feels overwhelmed and burnt out, and while you've been listening, the thought in the back of your head might be like, that's nice, but that's just not possible for me. My strong encouragement to you is to not go with that thought, but to push back a little bit. So like, all right, if it was possible, where would I start? If it was possible to make a change to my situation, what would be the area or the change that would give me a significant benefit? And if you can't identify that, please reach out to one of us. Like, as Laura said, we're available to you. Free service through LCL. We do this as our job, and we like our jobs. So we're a resource to you. You don't have to figure this stuff out all by yourself. So please utilize us.
Very well said, Shawn. Yes, I echo all of that. And thank you so much for those parting tips. It really gives us a very hopeful note to end on with all that we can do. Thank you so much, Dr. Shawn. Thank you so much for all attendees. We have some more notes coming in about thanks for the helpful and insightful seminar. Agreed. We love your feedback. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And if you need help, if you want support with any of this, do reach out. We know that lawyers particularly have a hard time in asking for help. We are here and happy to be sounding boards and help direct you to some resources. All right, so with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you so much, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day and take care.
Thanks, everyone.